bounce some people over to you as well.
Okay, brilliant. Welcome, Dax. I'm really excited that you are here.
I'm sure it's going to be really, really boring and we're not going to talk about anything interesting.
You didn't have to tell people that.
You know, I'm kind of one of those boring kind of guys. I don't really have very much to say about anything.
Well, we'll find that out. On that note, why don't we find out a little bit about you, and then we are going to get into the topic that we have chosen for today's conversation, how to build or scale a coaching business with the help of neuroscience. So, Dax, let's first start with you. A huge welcome to you on Wealthy Wednesdays in We Tell Stories, and let's find out, what is your story?
My story. Well, given that I'm 50 next week, so that's a big part of my story. I'm just about to hit the halfway mark, so to speak. I've done a lot in life. As most people have, I guess. But sometimes when I look at my own story and my own journey, and I see it laid out on paper, it kind of feels like I'm bullshitting. It kind of feels like it's a lie, and that couldn't possibly have happened to one person in one lifetime. It's, you know, I've been really, really fortunate to have a lot of experiences, some very, very challenging, some very, very exciting, and a lot of stuff in between. I grew up on a kind of a housing estate in central London, to an alcoholic, violent father. We were very, very poor, like extremely poor. I was brought up around this violence for a very long period of time, both inside of the house with my father, but also the area that I lived in was extreme violence. When I was, I'll do this in chunks because there's a lot of stuff in between. So when I was 15 years old, I stabbed my father through the heart while he was beating my mum up, violently beating her up, in fact. And so I stabbed him through the heart. I ended up saving him for the paramedics to come, but there I was, a 15-year-old, arrested for attempted murder, and that was kind of, in my mind, that was the direction that life was going to go. I managed to, because my father was from a kind of a gangster background. He was a Glaswegian, tough gangster kind of person. So that was a society and a culture of not snitching on people. So he didn't press charges, and I got released, and I went to live in the Wales, in the mountains of the Brecon Beacons, for 6 months by myself, living off the land and doing a bit of occasional kind of day work before joining the parachute regiment. So I joined the parachute regiment at 16. I ended up kind of being with them for a little while. Later on, I joined the Royal Marines. From the Royal Marines, I was with them for a while, and then became a reservist. I was a reservist in a unit which were, most people would think of them as kind of like special forces. So I wasn't SAS or anything like that, but I had a job very similar to some of their roles, working in four-man patrols, calling in air and artillery strikes, all that kind of stuff.
That sounds very cool.
Yeah, it was a pretty cool job. Yeah, I had to learn a lot of stuff. It was like pretty technical. Once I went reservist, I found myself at kind of like a loose end of what to do with myself. I kind of, you know, I had at weekends I was away wearing green and kind of doing cool things, but during weekdays I didn't really have any work. So I bounced about from everything from road sweeper to literally a sewer worker shoveling shit in the sewers to kind of did a bit of time as a bodyguard. I did loads of things, and nothing really caught my imagination. And then I decided to kind of look back on where I'd come from and kind of where it all started. And for me, fitness had always been a big part of my life. I was a boxer from the age of 12. I kind of boxed in the regiments I was part of, and was very, very good at it. And then I joined those very, very highly physical regiments. And I decided I'll retrain. I'll become a personal trainer. I was already a military physical training instructor, but I decided to become a personal trainer. And so I went and got the qualifications with literally the very last of the money. And we were living kind of hand to mouth most of the time. And I remember the personal trainer course, or the gym instructor's course, was £325 with the YMCA. And I had to scratch my head and decide, if I spend that, we've got nothing left. But we did it. We took the gamble, and we went kind of sent me off, and I got the course under my belt, and then went to work for a gym. And they only had one day per week where they could offer me shifts. It was 2 hours per week at £5 an hour. So I was earning £10 a week from being a gym instructor.
Oh my
And
God.
I would I would spend, rather than just being there for the 2 hours, I'd spend about 40 hours a week in the gym just talking to people, networking. I didn't even think of it as networking. I knew nothing about marketing. I knew nothing about like any of the stuff of building a business. I just wanted to be around people and speak about fitness. That caught people's attention. I ended up getting a personal trainer job there. And within weeks, basically, I'd gone from being this unknown guy to being the guy who I had more clients working with me than all of the rest of the personal training team combined. So that went really well. I was part of the very first GP referral program in the country. So that started in Islington. It was called Prescription for Exercise, and you had to be degree qualified and all the rest of it to join this program. And I had no qualifications whatsoever to get me into that program. I didn't have a degree. I left school early from being an attempted murderer, right? And I only had military background. So I went for this interview, and they said, "You seem like a really nice guy, but you're not qualified. Go away. We're not offering you a place." I spent 6 weeks at the British Library studying journals on exercise science and physiology and injuries and illnesses and diseases and medicines. And I went back for another interview. They said, "You seem like a really nice guy with a bit more knowledge, but you still don't have a degree." I was like, "Oh, okay." I went back another 6 weeks at the British Library and literally scoured everything that I could. And I've always been studious, always been a bit of a nerd. So I kind of I went through that process. I went back, and instead of letting them interview me, I interviewed the panel. So this panel of people with degrees and master's degrees, and I sat there and I said, "What medications should a person take for this? What happens if a person has this kind of injury or this kind of disease?" And they were blown away, and they gave me the job. Within 6 weeks, I was the senior consultant of my own centre. Within 6 months, I was the senior consultant of the programme, and then advising the UK government on health matters related to rolling out these GP referral programmes. Around about the same time, I then opened my personal training studio. Personal training studio went from like literally nothing to being, over the course of 3 years, I became the highest paid personal trainer in the UK, and was for 15 years while I had the studio. So kind of I did all the TV and radio and magazines and all of that kind of cool stuff.
All the cool stuff you have been
And then
doing.
alongside of that, then I started to educate personal trainers. So my initial interest was actually more in the physical side. How do you rehabilitate people? How do you assess people? How do you kind of understand what's going on with them? And we found that exercises themselves could only take you so far, and there was a missing link. He said, "Okay, so what's next?" And it wasn't a natural jump for me to say, "Oh, it's psychology." The next jump for me was endocrinology. It was like, well, okay, so if people are changing their diets but they're not getting the results, maybe there's something wrong with the hormones. So I deep dived for several years into the hormonal side. And then so we were getting people better and better results, but there was still a large amount of people kind of like knowing what to do. Like we were able to inform them, do this, don't do that, do more of this, do less of that. And they kind of knew it. Like, people aren't stupid. There's nobody in the world who thinks sitting at home with like 2 gallons of Haagen-Dazs every night on the sofa is a better choice than eating a salad or chicken breast or going for a walk, right? So people aren't stupid. But what we wanted to kind of get to the bottom of, or what I really wanted to get to the bottom of, was why do people know some things but they don't act upon those things? So that took me into psychology. Off the back of psychology, I then wrote my first book, which was a goal achievement book called The Magic 100. It became a bestseller and sold like 6 figures in the first 7 days. It went crazy. And that's why I say, so much of the things I'm talking about, it feels like bullshit, because when you list them out like this, like, and it also sounds like there weren't difficulties or challenges in between, and there were lots in between. So I'm giving you the highlight reel. And anyway, so I became known as the goals guy, and people kind of booked me to talk on stages around the world and talk to people about motivation and stuff like that. And yet I still found that a lot of the same problems were coming up. So people would say, "Well, I know what to do. I just can't seem to get myself to do it. And when you're talking to me, I'm really motivated and I'm inspired, and you bring me all these insights, and I nod in all the right places, and I'm so excited. And I say, this time it's going to be different. And then I walk off, and 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 days later, I'm back to square one. I'm kind of doing the same old things. And so my quest really was to try and answer that question, like, how can we know something? And not just kind of flippantly, but intellectually really own it and say, I've got to stop doing that. I've got to start doing that.
Yeah.
And yet do something in complete opposition. If we know that the answer to your dreams is to walk out of your front door and turn left, And if you just do that, you're going to have everything you want. And you walk out your door and you go, I know I've got to turn left, and you still turn right. Like, why do people do that? And so what then started to surface for me was it started to come to me through aspects of neuroscience. But it wasn't really until I was in the tsunami and I was very graphically in the tsunami. And it wasn't until I actually met myself as a person who knew all the right things to do and yet would sit staring at the wall, bursting into tears, wondering whether I should even get out of bed or out of my pajamas today, wondering whether life had any meaning for me. It wasn't until I met myself like that neuroscience took on a massive importance, because it explained so many of the things that I was going through, and to greater and lesser degrees what I saw my clients and even the coaching students that I work with, what they were going through. And it explained so much. So that's why I'm a massive advocate for neuroscience in both the application of coaching, but also in the way we as coaches approach our lives, and by extension of that, our businesses. At the end of the day, our business is just one facet of our lives.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm such a big advocate for that, and why I'm kind of so deep into and passionate about sharing that message. So I know I rambled on a little bit there, but basically, if I put that into summary, I've done a lot of things. I've been successful. You could say I've been successful in every field I've worked in. I've become the highest earner around in all of that. So although earnings isn't the only indication, I'm sure the reason a lot of people joining this today is because they want to know how to make more money out of their coaching. So it doesn't matter whether it's been one-to-one coaching in health, fitness, relationships, business, whether it's been retreats, very high-end retreats, whether it's been online, offline, you name it, kind of every one of those fields where I've launched products and services and programs and projects have been very, very successful. And largely I could say it's down to the kind of the neuroscientific approach that I take, although I didn't always know that. Like I do now. Like, it's one of those in hindsight things you can look back, you go, oh, that's what I was doing.
Yeah, hindsight
but I
is a
didn't always
wonderful
know
thing.
that, so I'd be bullshitting if I was to say I
Hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it, Dax?
really is. So yeah, that's the long story short, or the short story long, however you want to put it.
Oh my God, what a fascinating story. I think it doesn't get as more dramatic than this.
Yeah.
And more inspiring than this. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
We are going to step into neuroscience next, but let me share with you that we have a live audience building up. We have Makezia, who's joined us. We have Jill Brown, who's joining us from Wales. We have Steve, who's joining us from US. And we have Carolyn, who's joining us from Singapore.
Wonderful.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about neuroscience.
Oh, it's such a huge topic, right? Neuroscience. So let's start with the basics, really, which is, when you boil it down, the brain is ultimately a pattern recognition machine. That's all it does. It looks for patterns, and then it tries to use the basis of those patterns. It tries to use what it finds from those patterns to answer the very simple question, the very first question that the brain is always trying to answer, which is, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Right? And so when it comes to how we work with ourselves, when it comes to how we work with our clients, how we fit into our relationships, how we operate, it's really important to understand that the brain's first requirement at all times is, first off, to be shown something that it can create a prediction around, like to be given information in it where it says, okay, there's a piece of information, whether it be old or new, right? There's a piece of information. Where does it fit into my current understanding of my level of safety? That's all that at the basis level. And I'm sure pure neuroscientists who work in labs will be horrified at me describing it this way, but in essence, that's really what it is. And so the brain is trying to establish these patterns in order to answer, am I safe? And based upon the answer, am I safe? Excuse me. Based upon the answer to, am I safe? It's going to depend what happens next. Okay, so we have different brain centers that are responsible for different things. We've got the areas that are responsible for both identifying and keeping us safe, the areas that are responsible for taking advantage of opportunities, and the areas that are responsible for, you could say, creating opportunities that don't exist yet. Okay, and so if we go through triune brain theory, and there are strengths and weaknesses to triune brain, but kind of triune brain theory says that we have this reptilian aspect, which runs all of autonomic systems, as well as the monitoring of safety. We have our mammalian aspect, which is mostly and largely concerned with how we relate to other people, how we fit into our social structures, and then where we lie within those social structures. In other words, connection and hierarchy. And if the needs in those two areas, if you could call it those animal areas, if the needs in the animals get met, if we make the animals safe, in other words, there are no physiological threats about to kill us, the roof's not about to fall in on us, we're not about to be swept away by a tsunami. If we are connected to people that are important to us, not being overly or harshly criticized, and also feel that our place in the hierarchy is both respected, but also gives us the opportunity to move up in that hierarchy, the brain would then say, hey, you're safe. And when it says you're safe, it says, well, you know what? You get to go and play in the playground now. And the playground, you could say, is the human part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of, if we use the traditional sense of it, again, it's not as clear and clean as this, but most people would have been brought up on the idea that we've got our left prefrontal cortex, which is mostly about logic and reasoning. And we've got our right prefrontal cortex, which is largely about creativity and kind of joining dots in things that don't exist yet, right? If you want to put it that way. So we get to go and play in the human brain to the degree that the other areas that the animals in our kind of brain, right, the reptilian and the mammalian, feel safe, and we get to go and be human. Mm-hmm. This has massive impact on not only how we operate our own lives, how we show up day to day, but also how we interact with our clients, but also how we build our businesses. Because if we are not in our human brains, we're not able to have those both logical and creative conversations. And if we're doing things, or we're trying to, a lot of coaches have been brought up on through marketing their business, have been brought up on a very persuasive model. The idea that these people over here will probably have objections. You've got to find the objections. You've got to counter them in any way you possibly can. And effectively, what a lot of marketing looks like is browbeating the objections out of people, right? We just keep pummeling you into submission and saying, oh, you know, and whether it's done in a kind of a very softly, or whether it's done in a more powerful kind of in your face kind of way, but we're kind of calling bullshit on people's ideas about why they can't have what they want to have and be who they want to be and do what they want to do. The interesting thing that neuroscience starts to show us is that you can't persuade the animals, right? You can only make them safe. Yeah. Any ideas that a person has about the value and merits and worth and worthiness of an idea that you're about to present to them is only really truly being evaluated in the human brain. Yeah. And so a lot of our work really has to come down to A, how do we help a person to become safe? Yeah. B, once they are safe, what is the information that they need in order to maintain that sense of safety in such a way that it makes them safe enough to go and explore? Because exploration is the beginnings of transformation. And most people aren't really exploring. They're either reinforcing what they already believe, or they're trying to explore, but from a place of non-safety, which means that they end up retracting again and pulling back. And this is what we see. Like when you and I are coaching together and you pull out some dreams from my head and suddenly I go, wow, Parag, I've never felt this way. I've never thought this way before. Amazing. Thank you so much. You're godsend to coaching. And I go away and I walk out the door and then suddenly I retract back into my old situation. It's because the safety has disappeared. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, a lot of coaches are leaning very, very heavily into what most people would call education. So they're trying to inform people into what to do next. Just do more of this and do less of that. But remember, in order for that to make any form of sense in the client's mind, they have to be in their human brain in the first place, in order for logic to make sense, and in order for us to hold the dream in our vision, right? Whenever you see a person acting in opposition to their own logic, whenever you see a person acting in opposition to their own dreams, what it means quite clearly is that you're not speaking to the human anymore. You're speaking to one of the animal aspects. And for most of us, because we're not really being threatened on a day-to-day basis for our survival, like we're not being throttled to death and there's not a tsunami wave coming in on most of us, most of our threat generally tends to come from the social aspect, which is, and we're seeing a lot of this in society at the moment, whether it be the BLM stuff, the transgender stuff, or any of the other stuff that's going on. It's mostly social threat. that pulls us out of our human brain and kind of makes us retract and entrench in our current ways of thinking. So information doesn't lead to transformation.
No.
And I think that's, I don't like to use the word mistake, because I don't really think most of us are making true mistakes, but a term that I tend to use is one that leans into Buddhism a bit. And Buddhism doesn't like to talk about right and wrong, good or bad. What it likes to talk about is skillful and unskillful. And skillful being defined as, given what you were trying to accomplish by that thought, that word, that action, did it happen, and to what degree? To the greater degree it happened, the more skillful you were. To the lesser degree it happened, the less skillful you were. And I think a lot of people, a lot of coaches, if they were really, really honest about their approaches to how maybe they run their own lives, how they try to help their client. This isn't to say people don't do a good job, but how they try to help their clients with coaching, and then ultimately how they try to build their business. You can't really, in most cases, be left with any other view than most of the approaches generally tend to be unskillful. They're not getting more of what they want. They're not feeling more of how they want to feel. They're not experiencing more of how they want to experience life. And so, kind of, for me, neuro coaching or the neuroscience of coaching is what lends us to be able to skillfully bring ourselves back into that position where we're able to say, is what I intended happening? If not, why not? What's getting in the way? And what's step 1, step 2, step 3 is? And it's not a case of pure information. It's a case of what is termed neuroassociation. It's joining the right links of the chain to the right links of the chain.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. What you're saying resonates deeply with our audience. We also have Jenny, who's joining us from South Africa. Martin is here, and Kat Daniels is here. Welcome, everyone. Jill says, I dislike that kind of marketing, the one where we hammer in and objections and say, stop doing that stuff. Right. She says she absolutely dislikes that kind of marketing. And Jenny says, exploration is the beginning of transformation. She loves that.
Yeah.
And Kat says, I love to replace mistakes with teachable moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Like all of that is so important, right? The fact that, see, exploration leads to clarification, right? You don't get clarity until you explore. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter how much information you put on a person. Like, you can say, yeah, but look, here's the scientific data behind the thing, and here's this new scientific data. And the human brain doesn't work in that way. It can't be informed. You can't be directly, and a lot of people aren't going to like this, but we can't be directly educated into training ourselves into a new behavior. It doesn't work that way. We neuroassociate. So the best way I describe neuroassociation is that, imagine if you were trying to build a bridge from this riverbank, and I'm trying to use the screen here, right, from this riverbank to this riverbank. And we know for a fact it takes 10 spans of bridge to get across. It needs 10 spans. Now, you can go and buy yourself 10 spans of bridge, and if you were to just start dropping those spans of bridge, bear in mind, they're made of the best steel and materials by the best engineers. Each individual span is brilliant. It's not going to collapse, no matter how much weight you put. It's brilliant, right? But if you just randomly dump spans of bridge into place, you don't get across the river. What you have to do is say, span 1 has to attach to the existing knowledge, in other words, the riverbank, right? Has to attach there. In order for this to make sense, span 2 has to attach, right? And this is how we cross the river, by linking one span to the next span. Very often when we're trying to inform and educate people into transforming, we're not taking into account the prior existing knowledge, experience, belief, values, morals that already exist in that person. So what we're kind of saying is, and how it's often felt, is the way you've been doing things up to now is wrong. Start doing this instead, right? We don't create a neuroassociation. We create an individual pocket, a span of bridge that's just stuck there in the middle of nowhere that we can't cross from either side of the river. And this is why it's so important just to keep kind of exploration. Like when you tell me what you do or don't understand about a thing, I can then insert the correct span of the bridge to not make your old experiences wrong or in any way, but to say, yes, and. Yeah, you've been doing that. Yes, and have you thought about this? And now we link the bridge. And in essence, that's what neuroscientific approaches to coaching, that's what neuroscientific approaches to marketing are, which is just saying, I can't negate your lived experience up to this point, but your lived experience may not be the most skillful interpretation of what's happened.
Yeah.
Right? People, we can use racism, we can use sexism, we can use anything and say, oh, I'm only being treated this way because I am black or gay or straight or white or whatever, right? We can have this framework in our mind. And actually, maybe people are treating you that way. That has nothing to do with your skin color. It might be that you're an abrasive, rude, and abrupt person, right? But but I can't just tell you that, because I have to then connect pieces of the bridge to the next piece. And so this exploration leads to clarity. The clarity leads to deeper understanding, and the deeper understanding starts to lead us down the path toward transformation. But a lot of people jump straight in and kind of say, there are things that you don't know, and the knowing of which would change everything for you. So I'm just going to make sure that you know that before we get off this call, or before you finish reading this sales letter. And that's not how people transform.
Yeah, I think it does more damage than actually helping them, because when we say, oh, I can tell you what you don't know, that implies that I'm bigger and better than you are.
Right.
And some people would take that idea on board, and their whole I'm not enough, not good enough kind of story will just get reinforced, or they might at best do the work and even get dependent on their coaches, which I think is even worse.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things I'm always trying to remind the people that I work with is it's not what you do that gets the result. If it was, we'd all start a diet and have six-pack abs within a couple of months, right? We'd all start a business and have six-figure incomes immediately. Like, it's not what you do, it's who you are while you do it, right? And that again, that comes back to this neuroscience. Like, which one of your brains is making the decisions for your business at the moment? Is it the reactive brain? Is it the one that's so concerned with public opinion and doing the right thing and not being judged or criticized? Or is it the human brain? And whilst very often we like to think of the human brain as being the highest part of the hierarchy, the human brain has its own problems. Sometimes we meet a person in a very emotional and animal state, and we try and meet them with logic and information and data, which just alienates us even more, right? So one of the possibilities, as you just quite rightly said, is that a person may capitulate, they may acquiesce, they may agree with us, not in all the right places, but we haven't really changed their belief. They've just gone, well, you know what, you seem to have a greater handle on this than I do. You seem to be more informed and educated and more successful than me. So I'll accept it explicitly, but implicitly nothing has really changed for me, right? Yeah. Which is very, very common in coaching. Yeah. The other side is that we can deem these things to be an assault on our personal identity, because when you challenge a person's beliefs, when you challenge a person's values, and particularly when you say something that may be in opposition, or at least appear to be in opposition to a person's moral judgments, you have by definition you've attacked the individual. And a person under attack will either fight back, fight, flight, or freeze. They'll fight back and they'll say, no, you're wrong. Screw you. I'm not doing it your way. Or they'll acquiesce. They'll go into agreement, but not really agree. Or they, very rarely you'll get the actual agreement where the person will go, actually, that makes sense. But very often we're applying rules to our conversations, including our marketing conversations with people, that actually don't bring them closer to us. In fact, they push them further away and entrench them more strongly and more deeply in the way they already think about things. And in fact, this has been one of the biggest things that I've noticed about the coaches that are struggling with their businesses and the coaches that are being really, really successful with them, is that the coaches that are struggling with their businesses generally tend to either be overly informative, try and win people over purely through information, or overly, I was about to say coercive. I haven't met that many coercive coaches, but I've met many who are leaning to persuasiveness. Mm-hmm. And when you try to persuade before having earned the person's trust, persuasiveness feels like coerciveness.
Yes. I love that point. When you try and persuade people before you have earned their trust, it's going to feel like coercion. There's no other way it can go, possibly.
Yeah.
What you just said resonates so much with me, Tax, because I see that. I mean, now I'm just listening to and putting everything together and saying, yeah, that makes sense. Because when I help people with their stories, the first thing that they need from me is feeling safe in sharing their stories, right? From the space I create for them, and am I going to be safe when I share my story? And unless and until that need is met, they would just not budge. They would just not take even the first step. And depending on what their life experiences are, obviously some people have bigger need for that safety, because that story of I'm not safe kicks in very
Mhm.
quickly and very strongly. And others, well, not so much, they're able to take that first step. So what you're saying makes so much sense, and I can see why safety is so important in what I do as well. So
Yeah.
thank you for giving me that
And
insight.
so just to cap that off a little bit, we have to be really aware of when we take safety too far, right? Safety can become coddling. And the kind of safety I'm talking about isn't, it's very popular these days for people to talk about safe spaces and creating safe environments and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And it's starting to feel very much socially that safety means that there's a whole bunch of things that you can't say and you can't do and all the rest of it. I'm very, very clear. When I'm talking about safety, it is that safety for me is that you are not going to be judged or criticized or denigrated or demoted, and there's not going to be any deleterious effect in having you share something with me. I'm not going to say, well, you're such an idiot, I can't believe, there's not going to be any ongoing deleterious effect based upon what you share with me. That doesn't mean I'm not going to challenge you. It doesn't mean I'm not going to ask for clarity. It doesn't mean I'm not going to lean into it a bit and kind of make you uncomfortable, right? And it's really, really important that people, that coaches in particular, because I've seen it go a lot in the other way at the moment. Some coaches are getting terrified to push people now because they're like, everything seems to be an affront, an attack, an assault, and I don't want to be that kind of coach. And just to be clear and explicit from the outset with people that as your coach, I'm here to help you get to the best and most skillful version of the truth, the one that's going to help you to get to where you want to go, be the version of you that you want to be while you're taking that journey to getting there, and then have the kind of experiences that you want to have, right? But being safe doesn't mean being comfortable. And so, and in fact, when you look at, so for me, I don't really make much of a distinction between how I coach and how I market, right? I market the same way, right? And it's because really all marketing is a communication of an idea with great skill and value, right? And that's it. And that's really what coaching is. We're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's really important to help a person see that they are that too much safety, particularly as it's currently being posited, too much safety actually creates unsafety, right? Because it holds us in our comfort. Like the ultimate in safety is bubble wrapped, sit in comfort, nobody allowed to say anything that might hurt you, make you uncomfortable, make you challenge a thought or whatever, right? And it's really, really important just to get that clear too.
Yeah, I think that's a very beautiful point you make, because we should be able to challenge our clients. If we don't do that, I think we aren't doing our jobs properly. And
Right.
that's what they pay us for, right? Help
Right.
them move forward and not just to mollycoddle them. That's
Right.
not what we are there for.
Right. So one of the ways that I describe coaching to people, like when they say, like, there's so many different ways that we can describe it. When someone says, so, but what is it that you do? I lean into the neuroscience, and what I generally tend to say is that what I'm doing in coaching sessions is lending you my human brain until you get yours back.
Oh, I
Right.
love that.
Right. And so my human brain is going to, like, if you think about my human brain, the human brain is left prefrontal cortex, logic, reason, all that kind of stuff, right prefrontal cortex, creativity. So I'm lending you all of that while you don't have it online for yourself, while you are in threat in one of your animal brains. And if I take that job seriously, and if I really mean that, then I have to lean into some things that are going to make you uncomfortable. I have to challenge some things that are keeping you in the threat, right? My first job is to help you get out of threat. Is one of the great realizations when you approach coaching through neuroscience is that once a person is in their human brain, all the things that you think you need to be there as a coach will disappear, right? You don't have to be a source of motivation and inspiration and clarity and guidance and all that kind of stuff. These are the natural consequence of being in your human brain. The only reason that you're not creative and inspired and motivated and all the rest of it is because you're currently residing in one of your other brains. And so my job is to say, how do I get you out of those brains long enough for you to go and make some of these decisions for yourself? I certainly don't believe the client has all the answers. They don't, because clearly over time, we learn so much during our lifetimes. It's impossible for anyone to have all the answers. But the client does have all the questions if you actually allow them to be with them for long enough. And the only way they're going to be open to and be prepared to engage in those questions is if we ask essentially what was already in their mind. Right? But clients have said to me so many times, really, like when I say, when you boil it down, what are you really, really trying to understand? And very often, even clients that don't normally swear in conversation, they'll say, why the fuck did I do that? Or why the fuck am I not doing that? Right? That's really what they're like. I don't get it. I don't understand. Like, why is it that I can know what to do, but do the opposite? And this is, if you can help them get back to their human brain by donating yours to them for a little while, you say, and this is why we as coaches, we have to avoid being dragged into our animal brains, particularly our mammalian brain, where we start to go, well, that's an inappropriate question. What will the client think of me? Will I anger them? Will I upset them? Or we have to just basically be in a place where we can say, my job is to serve you back to your humanity.
Yeah. I love the idea of lending our human brain to our clients until their human brain comes online. So what are some of the things we can do, Dax, to make sure that as coaches, we stay in our human brain and not slip into the mammalian or the reptilian brain?
Well, thankfully for most of us, the reptilian brain is, people like to talk, you see it written all the time and kind of the fight, flight, freeze and all the rest of it. But the reptilian brain is in the sense that it's often spoken about, is mostly going to be triggered by genuine kind of life and limb kind of threat, right? So kind of you're about to slip off the cliff or drive your car into the central reservation or something like that, or being mugged in a dark alley. Most of our threat is actually going to come down to our mammalian setup, like how our mammalian systems are geared. So the mammalian systems are mostly sensitive to threat that are related to connection. So anything that threatens connection, which also includes so the things that threaten connection are when you judge me, criticize me, reject me, right? So I'll tend to do anything that will kind of keep me, I'm not going to, there are some things that are being said in the world at the moment, and I really do have some strong thoughts about them. But every time I see people go online and make a post about that, they're vilified and attacked and kind of doxxed and all the rest of it. So I'm not going to do that, right? So we don't want to be rejected. And then there's a secondary aspect that causes us threat, which is losing our place in the social hierarchy. People currently see me like this, and if I post that or talk about this, then I may actually go down in the hierarchy. Going down in our hierarchy is a massive threat to us as well, right? So you think, this causes a lot of shit for us, because if pretty much everything we ever say or do, any way of being, any way of thinking, any way of feeling that we put out into the world is up for judgment and potentially then criticism from anybody. So how do we protect ourselves from that? Well, the first thing is that we need to be very, very clear on what our beliefs are. We need to be very, very clear on what our values are. And we need to be very, very clear what aspect of the moral frameworks we're using for putting our ideas out into the world, right? Unfortunately, most people aren't really that clear about it. When I run my courses and programs, like for the people that are going through one of my programs called the Guru Project, for example, they'll often spend six weeks or more just figuring out what their beliefs and their values are, right? It can take that long to really whittle them down. And the reason I spend such a long time is because your ability to show up in the world as no one is bulletproof and we're all sensitive to criticism, right? But the ability to show up resilient is based upon how well you know yourself. And when someone then points a finger and someone says you're full of shit, or you're racist, or you're sexist, or you're homophobic for putting out something that to you is a fairly neutral comment, the only way that you can come back from that and say, oh, instead of crumbling and going, oh shit, like I've just been judged in this way, the only way that you can come back and say, actually, I'm firm in the ground that I was standing on, is because you know exactly what you meant by every word that you chose, every belief that you expressed, every value that you posited, and every part of the moral framework that you were using to put your message forward. Most coaches haven't even done that work to the degree that I believe they need to. That's an opinion. I'll be very clear on that. But the reason I'll posit that quite strongly is because a lot of coaches aren't saying what they really want to say, and they're not sharing what they really want to share, and they're terrified of being caught out for either being a bullshitter, a hypocrite, a something, right? And you spent, the number of, I've been really fortunate over the years to literally, people can post this all they want, but like, it's been a literal case for me. In the 22 years I've been a coach, I've spoken to literally thousands or tens of thousands of coaches. And the core common theme that comes up again and again is this bullshit factor, the hypocrite being scared to be caught out for something, right? And as soon as they get these elements in place, the morality, the values, the beliefs, and as soon as they get them defined, refined, and aligned with, so they're actually living them out loud, they start to become not bulletproof, but definitely resilient. They can take the hard shots. They can be rocked off their feet. They can even be knocked flat on their back. And then a day or two later, they can come back and go, hold on, that was an unjust attack on me. I get what they were saying, but actually, no. And they come back again. That resilience comes from knowing ourselves. The kind of the whole know thyself, right? Kind of that we've all been taught, and very often we pay lip service to. But when you really do know yourself, you become resilient to all of those shame and blame and guilt factors that other people want to point onto you and direct onto you. And you start to be able to stand in your own space and say, I'm not saying I'm right for you or you or you or you. I'm saying that I've done the work of defining myself, and until you can offer me a better definition, that I'm not gonna accept your judgments. And that's where you're in that rock solid position to be able to really show up in life powerfully, and really engage with the world on, people like to talk about authenticity. It's kind of like a buzzword these days, but authenticity, it comes from the words auto hentes from the old Greek, right? Auto hentes, it means to be self-created. We have to create ourselves before we offer ourselves to other people. Unfortunately, what a lot of people are doing is they've got ideas for the world and they feel so passionate about them, and they say, I'm going to share these great ideas with the world. The world points a finger back and says, you're full of shit and you're not walking that talk and you're not doing those things. And we crumble because we haven't created ourselves. We're trying to help other people to create themselves. I really believe that the strongest position you can ever come from in life, whether that be a marketer of a coaching business, a coach, a father, a husband, a daughter, a son, or whatever it is that we offer our created self to the world first. We say, oh, don't worry guys, I've done the work on myself first, and I'm going to share the bits of you that I've gotten clear on. And actually, once I share those bits, the world's going to poke some fingers. I'm going to pay a lot of attention to where I crumble or where I still feel shakeable. And I'm going to go in, not defensively reinforce those things, but protectively reinforce them in terms of saying, it's not to avoid your blows. It's to make sure that I personally am as strong as I can be. And I think that's an element of the work that is missing from humanity in general, coaches specifically, but then coach entrepreneurs especially. We haven't quite got the definitions of ourselves strong enough to be able to offer them to the world in a way that we can stand behind them. When someone says, why are you so expensive? Or why do you charge so much? Or why are you so selective of your clients? Or why are you saying that why are you being so exclusive and I can't work with you, but he can? And for you to be able to say, here's why, because I've done the work on myself. I've thought it through. These are all my reasons and my rationale, my understanding, my belief. And most of us, we're not in that position. So we end up being this kind of homogenous, try and fit everybody, try and accommodate everybody, don't want to be the source of rejection or judgment onto someone, try to persuade people, but then when they push back at us for persuasion, back down and say, oh, no, I didn't mean it that way. And instead of us being the lighthouse that everyone kind of looks to, we become the kind of the jack-o'-lantern that is kind of like bouncing around in the fields, and we just keep changing our position. We keep saying, oh, you didn't like that. Well, let me say it this way. Oh, that offended you. Well, let me go. And I don't think that's a skillful way for a coach to
No.
approach building a business, making an impact, or really helping to become a source of transformation in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm just reminded of the conversation that we had when the world was just getting into the lockdown earlier this year, and there were two clear parties. There were people who wanted to slow down, and for them, the world was stopping. And there were some of us who were saying it's time to step up. And I think that's where you and I really resonated with each other, and we were members of the same gang, the same side. And I think one of the reasons we could do that was because we understood, we were so solid in our own foundation.
Right. And everything we do, remember, I started this by talking about neuroscience. So the brain is a very simple machine. Prediction and response. That's what it wants, right? Prediction says, let me gather all of the information from my environment that I can, look at the pattern. I use the pattern to create a prediction. I use the prediction to create a response, right? That's all it's ever doing. Well, where the greatest source of that prediction and response comes from our own self-definition. And a lot of people are looking outside of themselves looking for you to tell me what kind of guy I am, right? So, so then if you tell me something good about myself, then I'll wear that and I'll pin it on my chest and go, see, Parul said I'm awesome. But if you said I'm not, I'm either going to fight you back over it, or I'm going to get shakeable over it. And this is the position that so many people are in. They're constantly looking for the praise. They can't take either the criticism or the judgment or the information coming back from them. And that's because you'll never be able to fully accept external information, or even be able to address external information and judge it as worthy or unworthy. So some external information is really worthy. Like if I come on every call and I'm rude to everyone and I'm conceited and arrogant, and people start feeding back to me and saying, Dax, you've got a lot of knowledge, but I'm never having you on my show again because it just wasn't a good vibe. Eventually I would want to pick up on that pattern and say, maybe there is something about how I'm presenting that needs to be amended here if I want to make the most skillful impact. That said, if you pick out some other character flaw that you might perceive in me and decide that you want to share that with me and I don't agree with it, I should be in a strong enough position to say, I understand where you're coming from in your case, but actually I don't agree. So there's nothing about me that needs to change. And so many of us, we're in a constant flux of change. And change isn't transformation. Transformation means to alter the structure. Transform, to change structure. Structure determines function. If you want a football rolls the way it does because it's a ball, right? A building stands up because of how it's been structured. Structure always determines function. This is a really good place to kind of think to ourselves, how is my life functioning? How is my business actually functioning? How is my life functioning? How are my relationships functioning? How is my health functioning? Right? And if it's not going the way you want it to go, the very first thing to do is to look at the structure. And it nearly always the first point of looking at the structure of a human being is to look at their beliefs, morals, and values. Say how are they defined, refined, and aligned with, and keep coming back to that. It's so important. And it in some respects it's the hardest work because it's kind of the work that we want to gloss over. But I remember when I was first coached by another coach, he spoke to me about the importance of beliefs and values. And I got like an A4 sheet that I was supposed to print out and work my way through. And then basically we moved on and we never spoke about them again. And which kind of indicated to me that it's one of those lip service things. And interestingly enough, a lot of coaches have this approach. We spend minutes in values and beliefs and morals, but all the while trying to fix the out there world and say, well, what you need to start doing and what you need to stop doing. So let's change your actions, but not really address any of the beliefs, the values and morals that drive those actions. It's unskillful when you think about it that way. And it's why if you don't change the form, right, you can't transform. If you don't change structure, you can't change function. Yeah. And neuroscience understands that completely. every area of design, building design, aircraft design, all engineering understands that structure determines function. I think coaches generally tend to forget that. And we try to dive in very, very early into, let's just change how you're functioning. Let's just get you doing some different stuff. And sometimes if it's a minor tweak, like eat a bit less chocolate and a bit more greens, right? Kind of sometimes that's enough. Like we don't need a moralistic change, and we don't need to necessarily change our values. We may have to tweak a belief that actually, am I over consuming something that's not really that skillful for me? But most of the time it requires minor changes. But most of the big things, and I say big things, they either impact us emotionally, as in we are constantly feeling shitty or like failures or in some way negated in life because of something that's happening and has continued to happen over and over again. Well, remember, if structure determines function, if I don't change the structure, I can only ever keep having the same experience. That's no matter how much I in the short term change things. We as coaches need to embrace this. I think we need to lean into the idea that if I'm not really doing anything to affect change at the structural level, I'm probably not doing anything for the long-term transformation of my client. And we coaches have gotten really good at change. We're brilliant at change. We make someone feel happy. We make someone feel trusted and accepted and connected and cared for that moment that we're in the call and maybe a little bit after it. But it's kind of shocking how few people actually transform as a result of coaching. And I think this is why coaching has kind of gotten a little bit of the rep that personal training had for a long time, which was well-meaning people, like no one's out there to rip you off, well-meaning people that say the right things, that motivate you, that G you up and get you doing, taking new actions, but that don't necessarily provide you with what's necessary for your long-term transformation. My company in the early days, we were really famous for our rapid transformations. We would get people amazing results. We were the first results guaranteed service or your money back. Then I doubled it and then I 10x'd it. Like if you didn't get the results we promised, you get 10 times what you invested in us back. We could get people results, but what we noticed is that people going through the 30, 60, 90-day transformations look amazing on day 90, but if you go and meet them 30, 60, 90 days later, they were often back to where they started. So transformation didn't occur, but change did. Mm-hmm. So we changed nothing about their structure. We didn't really change what they believed. We didn't change their value system. We didn't do any of that kind of work. We just gave them new shit to do for 30, 60, 90 days. And while they were doing it, they got the result, but they never really changed. Remember, I said, it's not what you do, it's who you are while you do it. And if you're not really helping a person to transform who they are at a structural level, you're probably not going to get the long-term results. And we've seen that with coaches in their businesses, right? They'll get this little flurry of new input, new clients, make a little bit more money this month, but next month they're back to where they started. Nothing has really changed. Mm-hmm. And so, one of my big invitations for coaches is to really embrace leaning into being a source of true transformation in the lives of their clients. And we do that first by being a source of our own transformation. We don't have to have all our shit together. We don't have to be infallible, make no mistakes, and all of that kind of stuff. That's not what this means. Like I don't have to be, and I've been very, very clear that I don't have to be a model to you of how you should run your business, how you should be a coach, how you should be a human being on this earth. I don't have to model that. And in fact, whenever I try and be a model, I put myself under a lot of stress. That day where I don't stick to my diet, that day where I can't be asked to write the post, that day where I don't do all the things I've been nagging you to do, right? But I can be an example of things. A model and an example is two different things. I can be an example of a person walking their talk most of the time, but who still has human issues that get in the way. But I can be an example of how I bounce back from those human issues. I could be an example of a person who's very clear in their morals and their beliefs and their values and how you live those out loud. But I can also be an example of, you don't have to be perfect. Like shit hits the fan in everyone's life and you can come off, but this is how you get back. So we can release ourselves from the model perspective, the perfectionist perspective, and lean into that excellence and exemplary in the truest sense, like to be an example of something. And we can do that. And our clients will probably not really embrace the importance of doing values work and beliefs work and morals work and all of this structural work on themselves until we can be seen to be a person who's really embracing that in our own lives. Because if we hand them an A4 sheet, make them do it once, and then move on and say, okay, so here's what we do with your business, and here's the first post you have to put out. What we've kind of said is that all that other stuff is bullshit. It's not really that important, but it sounds good. Right?
Oh, I love that.
And in fact, it's the opposite, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't sound good, but it's really important.
Yes.
It's like eating your greens doesn't sound good, but it's really important. And it's leaning into the fundamentals that I think a lot of people are missing. And if only we could do that, we just by dint of doing that, we would be taking a more neuroscientific approach to coaching.
Yeah. So focus on structure and look at that structure that is essentially beliefs, values, all the deep stuff, and start from yourself. That's the best place to start. Right.
I remember when I first started talking about this, like most people, I'd read a few good books and I'd been to a few good seminars. It sounded awesome. And I started pontificating to clients about how important it was to do this work. And all I'd ever done is the A4 sheet, the same as them, right? And I wondered why won't they take this seriously? Why won't they embrace it? And I realized that I wasn't taking it seriously. I wasn't embracing it. I wasn't living it out loud. And one thing about leaning into your morals and leaning into your beliefs and leaning into your values and being a person who's actually doing that in the world is that it's self-evident. You can't bullshit. You can't lie it. Like, because it shows up in literally every post you ever put out, in every conversation you ever have, even when you're having what people might call an argument, right? You can still be a person of morals and values and clearly expressing your beliefs with, you don't have to browbeat the other person. It clearly shows. Now I've seen people talking about morals, values and beliefs who then go onto someone's post and tell them that they're full of shit and that they've got it all wrong, right? So in other words, clearly you're not walking the talk of what you're professing. And I think that's a big part. We don't have to be role models, but we do have to be living it out loud. We have to be saying, here's what I believe, and here's what I'm doing about that belief in the world. You can see it. And the best marketing we can ever engage in is actually just to demonstrate the truth of who we are to other people, not to try and have them believe that we are. I can't persuade you that Dax Moy is a person of beliefs, values, and morals, but I can demonstrate it in the world. And over a period of time, you can go, you know what? The first time I read his post seemed a bit out there and a bit full of shit, but actually every time you see a post of him, and I get this kind of feedback all the time. Every time I've seen one of your posts over the last 15, 20 years, it's like you seem to be saying the same thing and sharing the same message, and if anything, aligning with it even more strongly. And if we can just do that and not keep jumping around and not keep trying to figure out what's in the minds of other people, but get so clear what's in our own mind that other people can't misunderstand us, right? They can't, like, if you show up in the world as a person for whom it's impossible to be misunderstood, you can misinterpret. You can say, well, Dax probably means this, and like, misinterpretation is a very different thing, but misunderstanding only really comes from me. If I put it out there and I say to you, Pearl, I'm about to say something that's a bit challenging. Here's what I am saying, and here's what I'm not saying, right? Here's very clearly, I am saying this, but I'm not saying that means that you're wrong, that all of these people who believe this are idiots. But what I am saying is I believe strongly in this because I have more evidence of it working, right? We need to be in a position where, as we communicate, and particularly if we want to communicate effectively in marketing, right? Which for me, marketing is just coaching by another name, right? And if we want to market our coaching businesses, we need to go out of our way not to be misunderstood. Leave it to other people to make the decision to misinterpret us, but make sure that we're not misunderstood.
And for that, we need utmost clarity on who we are and what we stand for. Right.
And so it comes back to the same nucleus.
Always comes back to us.
Always comes back to us. And unfortunately, it's the bit that most of us want to skip, even coaches.
That's the hard work, isn't it?
I've been helping coaches with their businesses for over a decade. And most of them want to get to, yeah, but tell me what kind of post to put out, what kind of link bait or title I should put, Tell me what kind of sales message I should put that's going to guarantee them. Like, all of that stuff is what you've been led to believe is the deciding factor. But particularly coaches, more so than, like, there are still places where persuasion really works. There are still places where that in your face kind of telling you what to do next and that really works. It generally tends not to work in coaching. It works in people who are selling stuff. Buy my widget, my gadget. It works in certain areas of, if you're marketing, it can still work. But when you're actually selling coaching to the end user, it doesn't work anymore, right? It used to have high efficacy when people didn't know what was happening to them. Now most people have seen what you're doing to them. They've seen it 1,000 times and they're like, I know what you're doing here. You're trying to manipulate me into a black or white yes or no decision. You're trying to tell me if I was really serious about changing things that I would take this action. You know, I get what you're trying to do. Persuasion doesn't really work in coaching, but demonstration does. And the first demonstration is who we are as coaches. And again, if we can just lean into that, we are by definition leaning into neuroscience.
Brilliant. Dax, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing this wealth of knowledge. Before we let you go, tell us, how can people get in touch with you?
I have a couple of tribes, but my favorite tribe now that I'm building is actually offline. So it's I'll give you a link, but it's at the Enlightened Coach. I share that on a Mighty Networks platform now, which actually, one of the reasons I'm on Mighty Networks is that it actually allows you to say more of what you want to say without being worried that Facebook are going to shut you down for using the wrong phrase or any of that kind of stuff. I'm a big believer that a coach should, or any entrepreneur should, actually own the assets that they're creating. And obviously Facebook takes away a lot of that. Doesn't take away from the fact it's very convenient, but we need a place for assets. So I'll share that link with you after. And also, if you're interested in learning the neuroscientific side of being a coach, I run a year-long diploma program called Mind Map Mastery. And that's at mindmapcoach.com. And where all the things we've been talking about here, but in a lot more depth, there's over 100 lessons there at the moment. So and growing all the time, all of that's there. So yeah, that's it. Otherwise, I won't hit you with everything, because otherwise it'll get spammy and I'll start doing all the things I've just said not to do.
But will you kindly drop the links just underneath this video when we finish talking?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Dax. Thank you to everybody who joined us live today. And I am going to stop the live streaming now. Thank you so much, Dax. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
Okay.
There you go.